So this review series I'm doing on the Amicus Anthology horror films is coming to a close with their last film, which is From Beyond the Grave from 1974, which actually a lot of people consider to be the best film they ever made. A lot of people disagree. So what do I think? Did this series end with a bang or a whimper? Let's talk about it. What's going on, my friends? Welcome again to the Cobwebs channel. My name is Daniel, and yes, From Beyond the Grave is the final film in the 7-film series of anthology horror films that Amicus made. And while a lot of these movies we've been talking about have been directed by Freddie Francis, some by Roy Ward Baker, this one was directed by a guy who never made any of these movies. In fact, he never made a movie. First-time director. His name is Kevin Connor. But later in his career, he actually made one of my favorite 80s cult horror movies called Motel Hell, which is really fun. Cannibals in a slaughterhouse horror movie. I think it's a good time. Each of the scary stories we're going to see in this movie are based on stories written by Ronald Chetwynd-Hayes.
Come in. Come in. I'm sure I have the very thing to tempt you. Lots of bargains, all tastes catered for.
And the movie opens up with Peter Cushing as an antique dealer. Yes, we get Peter Cushing leading up the wraparound story of this one, which is really cool because Cushing led the wraparound in the first film in the series, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. So it's cool to see things come full circle. He's back as the host of all the scary stories we're going to watch. He's an antique dealer, and right at the beginning of the movie, a guy comes in to see him who's played by David Warner. Now, David Warner is one of my favorite character actors, shows up in a lot of movies, a lot of horror movies like Waxworks and The Omen. He's just in tons of cool stuff. And he's checking out this antique mirror, and while Peter Cushing wants to charge a lot for it, he says he knows that it's a fake, so it should be way cheaper, and Peter Cushing goes along with it, so he buys it for a cheap price, and later admits to his girlfriend that he lied about the illegitimacy of this mirror, and it's actually a very valuable antique.
Wasn't that a bit dishonest?
Not at all, just good business practice.
So right at the start of the movie, it's kind of setting up that these stories are going to spring off of this antique store, that someone's going to get something at this antique store, they're going to do something dishonest to get it, and that's going to spurn the scary story that we're going to see. That's what it seems like, at least. So now David Warner and his girlfriend are hosting a party, and what does anybody do at a party? Somebody immediately suggests, let's hold a seance.
What a splendid idea.
But seriously, have you ever been at a party and somebody suggested, let's hold a seance? Because I actually haven't, and it seems to happen in horror movies all the time. So maybe I'm hanging out with the wrong people. The seance does have an effect on David Warner, and he has a vision of this creepy guy in white makeup with a cape and a sword, several swords actually, and he's not sure what this vision means, but later that night, he realizes he's now seeing this guy in the mirror, and this guy is hungry. He wants David Warner to feed him somehow until he is fulfilled. And yeah, he wants to be fulfilled by murder. He wants David Warner to murder people in order to give him some kind of sustenance. This segment, it actually reminds me a bit of the first segment in the second Amicus anthology called Torture Garden, which was about a guy, his mind was being messed with by this cat, and it was driving him to kill people. This is kind of like that, except way better, because the face in the mirror is actually really creepy. Just this super decrepit, creepy man with long hair and a beard. It really works, just surrounded by fog. He's got this ominous voice. I really like the atmosphere of this segment, and this segment is better than that Torture Garden one because the murders are actually pretty gruesome. This is actually a pretty gruesome segment. You can tell that the Amicus anthologies are right smack in the mid-70s, so they're able to go a little harder than those 60s movies were able to. One by one, David Warner is bringing women back to his apartment, murdering them, and it's all rejuvenating this man in the mirror. Also, this kind of reminds me of Hellraiser, where Julia keeps killing people to bring Frank back to life. Gosh, I love Hellraiser. What a great movie. This kind of reminds me of that too. And I gotta say, I really like this segment. I mean, for one thing, it's just great to see David Warner. He's so good, but this is gruesome, atmospheric. I love the face in the mirror, and I love the ending because we're wondering what's gonna happen when this mirror guy actually gets fulfilled. Well, that means he gets to come out of the mirror, but the only way that he can walk among the living, because he seems to be some kind of ghost, is if David Warner kills himself, which he does get him to do, and now he is the man in the mirror. feel like most of us could probably see that coming, but that doesn't make it less satisfying. It's really good. This segment kind of rocks. Segment number 2 is called An Act of Kindness, and we actually don't stop back at the antique store. We just roll right into the next segment, which is interesting. It's starring Ian Bannon, who I think is really good in this segment. He's just really good about being this nice guy who's just kind of awkward and a little bit weird. And his character is that he's basically an office drone who is unfulfilled at work, but much more unfulfilled at home. His wife is just mean. She is awful. She's so cruel to him.
Who do you think you're talking to in that tone of voice? Some of the girls at your office?
Just belittles him constantly.
To them, you may be the boss, but I know what you really are. A jumped-up clerk. That's all an office manager is.
And what we find this segment is really about, it's about a man who feels very small, who has been just belittled and is just desperate to feel big in some way. He befriends this street peddler played by Donald Pleasence. And yes, that Donald Pleasence, it's so cool to see him in this. It's actually kind of surprising to me that Donald Pleasence is only in one Amicus anthology. He seems like the perfect kind of actor to be in one of these movies. So I'm glad he finally shows up in one. He is also great. And man, the performances are so good in this particular segment. Donald Pleasence is an ex-serviceman, as is our main character. So they kind of bond with that. And it seems like this friendship is starting to mean a lot to our main character. So then he goes to the antique shop. This is really interesting. The wraparound comes back into play in the middle of this segment, not at the beginning. So I find the structure of this movie pretty interesting. And he's trying to buy a service medal, like a medal of honor sort of thing. I don't know exactly what kind of medal, in order to impress Donald Pleasence with, which is such a weird thing to do. And Peter Cushing won't sell it to him without a certificate that he actually won it, because he claims it's just a replacement for one that he won. But of course he doesn't have that certificate, so he steals it. So we're back to an act of dishonesty in the antique shop, supposedly setting off the segment, although the segment's already started. Things seem to already be in motion. As their friendship progresses, Donald Pleasence invites him back to his house for tea, and he gets to meet Donald Pleasence's daughter, Emily, who's played by Angela Pleasence. Yes, Donald Pleasence's real daughter is in this, playing his daughter, but it's not just nepotism here. Actually, Angela Pleasence is fantastic in this segment. I told you, great performances for this story. She's so good at being really weird and creepy. Immediately when he comes over to their house, she is just so creepy.
Eaten by worms in the cold, wet earth.
But it doesn't seem to bother him. I think because he's just so unhappy at home. He's just so happy to be around people who respect him. He is so easily drawn in by these characters because they give him so much respect. They believe he's this distinguished serviceman, this distinguished gentleman, and he just loves feeling big. And that's exactly what they do for him. And around this point, two things are becoming clear. One, the ultimate plan is they want this guy to marry Emily, Donald Pleasence's daughter, and it's also clear that she's involved in some kind of witchcraft. She lights a black candle, and she has some kind of voodoo doll, and she says to him, "If you command it, I will kill your wife," basically. And he goes along with it. The wife dies, and the wedding is on. In this series, talking about all these different segments, I've been kind of talking about what are the stories that have the best human story within them. Because there are stories that have good horror to them, good spooky imagery, something like that. But what are the segments where you're interested in the human interactions and what the story's really about on a human level? And this segment's the best for that. It's really good. I'm really drawn into this guy's story. He's not so much likable as he is like relatable in sort of a sad and pathetic sort of a way. And you feel for him when he interacts with his wife because she's so terrible to him. And you understand why he's drawn in by these people that may not have the best intentions. In fact, when we get to the final twist of this segment, right after he marries Emily, she then commits an act of voodoo on him, kills him, and it becomes clear they did it for the son, his son with the terrible woman who was his ex-wife.
You see, Stephen,
We always answer children's prayers.
Who apparently prayed for his parents to die.
But why?
What is going on here? Are they angels? Are they demons? What are they some kind of supernatural entity that answered the prayers, the dark, horrifying prayers of children? Why was this the method to kill this guy if that was the end goal? To go through all of this, get him to marry the daughter. They had him in their house a million times. They could have killed him at any time. I don't understand it. I love this segment, but this finale just feels thrown at the wall. Like they just needed a twist, so they came up with one. But I think they probably could have done better. By the way, did you notice the medal that he bought in the antique store didn't really have anything to do with his story? I mean, Donald Pleasence was already befriending him before that happened. So it seems like the trend of this being about a cursed object from an antique store isn't holding. This movie's not gonna stick to that. Then we roll right into segment number 3, which is called The Elemental. And this is starring Ian Carmichael, who goes into her antique shop and seems like he's buying a cigarette box or a mint box. I don't know, some kind of little box. I honestly don't remember. But he switches some price tags to get it for cheaper, and then he still negotiates the price down with Peter Cushing. So we've got our act of dishonesty. And then he goes on the train and meets some kind of clairvoyant woman named Madame Orloff. She's played by Margaret Leighton, and she says, "You have an elemental on your shoulder."
There's an elemental on your shoulder.
And I love this interaction where she just insists there's like a spooky little spirit on your shoulder. It's invisible, but it's there and it's sucking the life force out of you. And he's like, what are you talking about? You're being ridiculous. What is an elemental? She says it's a spirit of fire, air, and water, and it drains the people that it's on. And this elemental in particular is homicidal, and it has attached itself to you. I love this interaction. It's so ridiculous because like she sounds so obviously crazy. It's such a ridiculous thing to say to somebody. And he doesn't take it seriously at all, of course, and goes home to his wife. And his wife is played by Nairi Dawn Porter. And if you've been following this series, you know I absolutely loved this actress's performance in The House That Dripped Blood. She is the star of the co-star with Christopher Lee of my favorite segment in that movie. And I thought her performance was phenomenal. And here she's back in an Amicus Anthology, but unfortunately she's really just playing the wife here. There's not really an interesting part for her to play. Disappointing. I would have liked better for her, but oh well. But Madame Orloff's warning of this elemental did prove to be founded, because now his wife keeps getting attacked by it. At first she thinks it's him attacking her, but she comes along with the fact that, okay, yeah, you're not doing this. Something supernatural is happening. He calls Madame Orloff back and he is all in on this elemental thing. He's like, this thing is definitely reality and you need to get it off of me. And then she holds this ritual to get it off of him. And the movie goes crazy. Like there's just wind flying everywhere. Things are flying through the room. She's screaming these spells, incantations, whatever, to get this elemental off of him. And as I'm watching this, I realize, oh, this is 1974. This is the year after The Exorcist. The Exorcist in 1973. I mean, that was like the biggest thing to happen in the horror genre in so long. I mean, that movie was massive. I think they're doing an Exorcist spoof. I think that's what this segment is. This segment has got a comedic edge, much more than the first two segments had, which were very, very serious. And this one, it's mostly serious, but it's really Margaret Leighton's performance as Madame Orloff that takes this into a comedy realm, because she's just so silly and over the top in a really fun way. I'm definitely not complaining. But it's that comedic edge and the fact that this kind of seems like she's doing an exorcism off of him, but not of a demon, of an elemental. I think it's an Exorcist spoof, and I think it's pretty fun. It's fun to see that movie getting spoofed like literally just the year after it came out. Exorcist horror was brand new. They're already sending it up. Next up, we're going to the fourth segment, which is called The Door, which is starring Ian Ogilvy. And have you noticed the last three segments have all starred guys named Ian? This movie has got to be in the Guinness World Records for the most lead actors named Ian. Like, it's so random. They're all Ian, except for David Warner. Shout out David Warner for standing out. But this actor, if he looks familiar to you, if you're into 60s, 70s horror, it's probably because you saw him as the lead in The She-Beast with Barbara Steele and Witchfinder General with Vincent Price. So really cool to see him pop up in an Amicus anthology. And this one's kicking off once again in the antique shop. He buys a giant ancient door from Peter Cushing, thinks it's really cool, and he does negotiate the price now, but it doesn't seem to be for any kind of nefarious purpose. He's just like, hey, I've only got 40 pounds. What can you do for me? Peter Cushing goes along with it. Nothing wrong with it. But the movie hints that he may have switched out the money he gave Peter Cushing with less money or taken some money back. We're not really sure what's going on, but Peter Cushing's counting the money to check. But he takes this door home. He attaches it actually to a closet. It's his new closet door, but he just thinks it's cool. So he just likes it as decoration. But one time he opens up the door and he discovers there's this giant ancient looking blue room inside. This door has become a portal to some kind of other reality. And right here, I got to shout out that with this fourth segment, we've finally gotten back to the segment revolving around a cursed object from the antique shop. It's really weird how segment 1 and 4 go with this idea, and then 2 and 3 just kind of throw that away. But now he's going into this other room, exploring. It's full of cobwebs. It's very spooky. And the segment actually reminds me of a segment in Dead of Night, which is a 1940s horror anthology that was very influential on the creators of Amicus, of these Amicus anthologies, where he gets this mirror and he can see this other room in the mirror and it's haunting him. This is kind of like that, but with a door. This segment also reminds me of the first segment in the movie, because this spooky, long-haired ancient guy shows up and wants to kill his girlfriend, I guess. He's some kind of a alchemist, some kind of a sorcerer from the past who cursed this door to be his portal to immortality, something like that. My thing with this segment is it's really generic. I mean, this just sounds so basic, right? You get like a door that goes a portal to the past, and there's a spooky guy in there that wants to kill your girl. I don't know. I just think it's really basic, and it's really reminiscent of the first segment. Instead of a mirror, it's a door, but there's still a guy who wants to kill people. But in the first one, it was just way more interesting, because there he's getting into your mind and he's making you do it. This guy's just carrying his girlfriend off. And also the first one's more gruesome, and David Warner's just a better actor, although I like this guy too. This just very much feels like a less good version of the first segment. And I think that'd be okay if it was in a different movie, but it's just repetitive. It's got good production, good effects. I really like how everything's crumbling at the end. It is a fairly good spectacle for such a cheap movie like this is. I mean, this movie had a very low budget, but I do like the way that this ends, because it reveals that actually he wasn't dishonest. He did not cheat Peter Cushing, and he lives to the end. He's the only one that gets a happy ending. He might be, I'd have to double check and look, but I'm pretty sure he's the only lead in any Amicus anthology segment that gets a happy ending. So it's kind of cool that he's the last one. The last segment in this series, happy ending. That's kind of, poetic, I guess. Let's rate From Beyond the Grave. Now, the Gatecrasher, I'm going to give an 8. I think this is a great segment. I think David Warner's fantastic in it. I love how bloody it is. I love this creepy guy in the mirror. Very atmospheric. This is probably one of the most legitimately spooky Amicus anthology segments. I think it's pretty great. An Act of Kindness, this is my favorite segment in the movie. I like it a little more than the Gatecrasher, but I'm still going to give it an 8. I'm going to tie them as far as score. I think they're pretty much as good as each other. I just slightly prefer An Act of Kindness because I'm really invested in the human story of this one. I think it's probably the most interesting story. Love the cast. Everyone here is fantastic. Love to see Donald Pleasence. Love to see his daughter do a great job. I think the reason I don't rate this one higher is the twist is not great. It definitely feels thrown at the wall, just kind of lazy and rushed because they just had to do something. The Gatecrasher is the better ending. Elemental, I'm going to give this one a 6. I think it's solid. I think it's fun. It's a little funny because I really like Margaret Leighton's performance, and the fact that it's an Exorcist spoof is a good time. It's just very, it's the most slight. I think it's the most slight of all these segments. Just a fun little amusing thing, and it totally works for that. But finally, The Door, I'm going to give a 5. It bums me out that the movie ends on a little bit of a whimper for me, but a big problem is that it is repetitive. It feels too much like the first segment, but not as good, not a great story, does have good atmosphere, does have a good cast, but my least favorite in the movie. The wraparound, I'm going to give a 6. It's as high as it is because I like the atmosphere of this antique shop, and I love Peter Cushing in the role. He's really good. He's doing a little bit of a different accent, a little bit of a voice, but the movie doesn't stick to the wraparound's idea. The antique shop only matters for 2 of these segments. The other 2, it's pretty arbitrary that it's there at all. So because the movie doesn't stick to the bit, Gonna lower that score a bit. All in all, From Beyond the Grave gets a 7 out of 10. I think it's a fitting end to this series and a darn good horror movie. So that's my review of the last film in the series, but if you missed my review of the first film in the series, check it out right over here, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. I'll also put the playlist of all of my Amicus reviews right down there. Make sure you hit the subscribe because I will be doing a ranking list of all of these films very soon, so look out for that. Give a like if you enjoyed this. I really appreciate it, and I will see you next time.